Just a disclaimer, the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Quick reminders for everybody, please keep your phones on mute if not during the talking part of the discussion, and do not put your phones on hold, please. And this webinar is being recorded. The purpose of today's webinar is to help ensure sustainability of the AOT program at the conclusion of the SAMHSA grant cycle by engaging non-traditional partners. And CIT coordinators and officers are key non-traditional AOT partners. Betsy Johnson.
This is Betsy. You ready for me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see the slides advancing, so shall I be? I'll get them, bring them up. Okay. Hello, folks. My name is Betsy Johnson. I'm the Legislative and Policy Advisor for the Treatment Advocacy Center. My job is to work with states, primarily those in the Midwest, to promote assisted outpatient treatment. Prior to coming to Treatment Advocacy Center about 2 years ago, I was with NAMI, Ohio for 10 years. And while I was there, I helped spearhead Ohio CIT program. So this is a nice opportunity for me to see the two programs, which I believe are huge complements to one another, to kind of come together under one umbrella. So this is an exciting opportunity for me. My role here, I'm just going to speak briefly about assisted outpatient treatment for about 10 minutes and then turn it over to Mike Woody to talk about CIT. We wanted to just make sure, I know some of you have AOT expertise and others have CIT expertise, so we wanted to just spend a few minutes just doing some brief introductions so that we're all kind of starting out on the same level of understanding about those two different programs. So I apologize if this is redundant for some of you. So one of the things we'll be emphasizing on this webinar is the need to cross-train, so we're going to start by doing that ourselves. So AOT, if you're not familiar with it, is a community-based intervention through the civil court process. It is not through the criminal court. It should not be confused with mental health court. Folks in the AOT program have not committed a crime. These are folks who are caught in the revolving door of hospitalization and or incarceration, often because they lack insight into their illness. This lack of insight we refer to anosognosia. And if you look at brain scans, you can actually see anosognosia on a brain scan. But these are folks that, if ordered into an AOT program, receive community-based services and support, and it usually requires some level of intensive case management. The AOT first came to the forefront in 1999 as a result of a horrific case up in New York City involving a young woman by the name of Kendra Webdale. She was standing in a New York subway when she was pushed in front of an oncoming subway by Andrew Goldstein. And as we learned more about Andrew Goldstein, he was a young man who actually excelled, did wonderful in school, was in an excellent program, went on to college, and while he was in his late teens, he started to deteriorate and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Over the next 10 years or so, he had been hospitalized multiple times and was known to the system to have attacked 13 people. He was somebody clearly who had fallen through the cracks in New York. And Kendra's parents, Ralph and Patricia Webdale, channeled their grief into trying to change the law to make sure that this did not happen to anybody else, that others like Andrew would not fall through the cracks. So they worked with Governor Pataki, and in November of 1999, they passed the first assisted outpatient treatment bill. And what this bill did is it gave judges the authority to order somebody with a history of dangerousness into assisted outpatient treatment. Today we have all but 4 states have some form or another of assisted outpatient treatment. The way the AOT works is it starts with the filing of a petition. Depending on what state you live in, it depends on who can file the petition. Some states allow anybody. Others are more specific in terms of who can do that. But once the petition is filed, there has to be a demonstration of probable cause, and if there is, then a hearing can be held. Oftentimes, if a person is already in an involuntary hospitalization, the hearing can be held at the hospital. It requires the testimony of the treating physician. All due process protections are in place, and ultimately they have to determine that there's clear and convincing evidence before somebody can be ordered into outpatient treatment. I don't know. Ashley, I don't know why these screens
I'm not sure. Just a second. This is Lisa. I'm not sure what happened here either. It's like the slides started advancing themselves.
Yeah, we should be on slide, I believe, slide 8.
Okay, hold on. I'm not very good at the technology part of this. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Is this slide 8?
Okay. Yeah, that's slide 8. That's the one. Okay, so we just finished with that one, so if we can move on to slide 9.
Okay. Do you not have this arrow in your screen to be able to advance?
I do. I'm pressing it, but it seems to
Okay,
have a
I'll advance it. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay. So we should be on slide 9 now, the one that we yeah, here we go. Okay. So, so the way the AOT process works is ideally, well, somebody who is eligible for AOT may not be somebody, ideally it's not somebody who's necessarily currently violent, but it's somebody who has a history of lack of adherence to treatment that's resulted in violent behavior either towards themselves or others in the past. So a petition can be filed at any time when the person's in the community, or when the person's in the hospital. We've determined, though, that it's often most effective if the petition is filed at the time somebody's getting ready to be discharged from hospitalization, because at that point, that's when the patient has been stabilized and when they can understand the judge's order, the judge's order by placing them into AOT. And AOT works because of what's called the black robe effect. Some people say, oh, well, AOT, isn't effective because it has no teeth. You can't put somebody in jail if they don't follow their treatment plan. And that's not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that it's the black robe effect that really makes AOT work. And it's just because you might be somebody living with a mental illness doesn't mean that you don't respect authority, that you're not law-abiding citizens. I mean, there are some folks who may not be appropriate for AOT. They may not have respect for authority, but the vast majority of people do. So it's that authority at the court that really gets their attention initially. And then eventually, as the person begins to establish a rapport with the judge and with others on the AOT team, they start to, the judge's role really is to motivate them. So for instance, if somebody has been on AOT for several months and they go back before the judge can help them to see how much they've improved. A good judge will say, wow, when you first came to me, you had, this, you were in the hospital, you really did not look well, you were, struggling with, a place to stay, you didn't have good relationships with your family. Now today you're looking great, you've got you've been staying in the same place for the last several months, you've been able to reestablish relationships with your family members. You can really point out to them how they've improved by following through with their treatment. In addition to ordering the person into treatment, the black robe effect also commits the provider system to the individual. So not only are they ordering the person to follow through with the treatment, but they're ordering the treatment system to be there for the person and to make sure that that person is getting the treatment that they need and that's on their treatment plan. And if somebody's not adhering to their treatment, it doesn't mean that there aren't a lack of consequences. In fact, there really are. Judges can, require the person to come back for status hearings. They can order them to be reevaluated if they're missing. They can order, they can have the police pick them up and bring them in to be evaluated, and if they meet the criteria for hospitalization, they can have them placed back in the hospital. And that's often, you know, most folks don't want to be in the hospital just like they don't want to be in jail, so that often is very successful. So it really does, it doesn't mean, though, that they can force meds in the community. That is not what AOT is. There is no forcing of medications. One of the, just real quickly, so the team approach is really what makes AOT effective, and it's the communication between the various members of the team. One of the ways the team works together is they can ID people who are good candidates for assisted outpatient treatment. You don't have to necessarily rely on families to present the petition. If you have a team in place, it's the members of the mental health community, it's law enforcement, and it's the court working together to identify who might be good candidates for AOT. And then you can match the services with the candidates. So if you don't have a lot of housing in the community, you probably wouldn't want to target folks who are struggling with homelessness necessarily for your AOT program until you're able to actually build up your housing stock. But if you have other services, if you have an ACT team in place, something like that, then people who would benefit from having an ACT team services would be good candidates. And you also have dedicated staff, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But if you have the same group of people working with your AOT clients, they can begin to develop relationships with the court staff and with other partners on the team so that they can all communicate with one another. It also, having a program in place allows for swift corrective action, which means that if somebody starts to decompensate, that the mental health team can notify the court quickly, and then the court can follow up with some kind of consequence so that the person doesn't deteriorate further than necessary. And the team also can determine what does success look like. When is it appropriate to move somebody off of the AOT program? There are several studies, including the one that I've got referenced up above, that shows that AOT is indeed effective when it's presented in a program sort of approach. There's decreases in arrest rates, homelessness, hospitalization, and incarceration. There are also studies that show that AOT leads to cost savings as a result of reductions in hospitalization. In 2013, there was a study by Duke University breaks down these cost savings. AOT is also an evidence-based practice recognized by SAMHSA, and the Bureau of Justice Assistance has given AOT a check plus on effectiveness. And then finally, recently, it was just added to the sequential intercept model. So I know a lot of CIT folks on the phone are familiar with sequential intercept model, and AOT has been placed both at the 0 intercept and at the 5th intercept because it's appropriate in terms of diverting people from any kind of court involvement when it's ordered at the back end of a hospitalization or a jail release from jail, or it can be, it can go kind of at either side, at the very beginning of that sequential intercept process or at the very end. So next I'm going to introduce Mike Woody. Lieutenant Woody is from Akron, Ohio, and for those who are familiar, he is the immediate past president of CIT International. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. Thank you, Betsy. Now keep in mind, I've never been on a webinar before, and I am 68 years old and an old retired cop, so just bear with me. Hopefully I'll turn these slides as they should be turned. Akron Police Department, about 500 officers. The last few years on the department, I was the director of training. And my community actually came to me and said, hey, have you ever heard of CIT? And I said, well, what does that stand for? And they said, Crisis Intervention Team. I would have thought the T stood for training, but it stood for team. Anyhow, I was very interested in that. I knew that officers were dealing with those with mental illness on a more regular basis. Wasn't exactly sure why, but I knew we needed probably a lot more training in that area and a better understanding of all that. So Basically, let me tell you what CIT is, Crisis Intervention Team. Now, it's a community program, partnerships with law enforcement, your mental health professionals, and mental health consumers and their families. The goal of the program is to help persons with mental disorders access medical treatment rather than place them in the criminal justice system due to illness related to behaviors. And I think everyone would agree that that's really the best thing to do. Now, the model was developed in Memphis, so my community actually sent me to Memphis to go through that program back in, I think, 1999, where it had just recently got White House recognition for being so innovative. I went down there, went through the course, the 40 hours, came back a believer, and was very fortunate that my chief let me start basically the first CIT program in the state of Ohio. Fast forward to today, I've been at it for a long time, and Ohio, in my opinion, probably leads the nation with the number of CIT programs that we have. Why did Memphis develop this program? Well, about 2 years before an incident happened, NAMI down there in Memphis they realized that police officers were dealing more and more with people with a mental illness, and they didn't think they were handling it very well all the time. So they actually went to the Memphis Police Department and talked about giving officers more training. Memphis at the time didn't think they had a problem. I think part of that is most law enforcement agencies don't keep good track of those calls that are based in mental illness, whether they might not even realize it. But then 2 years later, so they kind of turned NAMI down. But 2 years later, there was an incident, man with a knife, a homeless man, and he was shot and killed by the police department. It aroused the community, and they wanted something done. And so the Memphis Police Department basically put their heads together, and they ended up using the University of Memphis, the Memphis hospitals, got some psychiatrists and psychologists involved, got Major Sam Cochran, who was a lieutenant at the time, involved, and put together what they called the CIT program. Basically, because they're a large department, I think about 1,500 to 2,000 men and women, they decided that this is a specialty, and it really needs officers that have emotional, intellectual, and experiential maturity in the classroom. So they got to handpick the officers that went through the class that volunteered. It turned out very successful for them, being a large department. Those officers handled regular calls just like any other officer out there in patrol, and they were patrol officers. But when it was based in mental illness, as normally determined by the dispatchers, so the dispatchers had to have additional training on questions to ask to determine that sometimes these calls may or may not be based in mental illness. Those calls got funneled to those CIT specialist officers. That really translates into them handling about 3 to 4 times as many mental illness calls as they used to. That in no time builds up an expertise, and because I think most of us would agree mental health calls are repeat calls, when they're going to that call, they've probably been there before, probably build up a rapport with that person and the family, and so it's going to go a whole lot easier. They have core elements, and the core elements of a CIT, one of the most important ones is the partnership. Now, that partnership's between law enforcement, advocacy, and mental health. And it doesn't end at just training, because it takes a lot of the mental health folks to come in and provide the training. And then, of course, your advocacy, they come in, a person with a mental illness comes in when they're having a good day, which officers don't a lot of times see that. they'll tell their story, and a lot of times their parents, they'll tell their usually somewhat heartbreaking story of their dealings with their child. And it's all about really building that empathy for those with the illness. But that partnership goes on because, as I started off saying, the goal is really to divert folks from the criminal justice system, to the mental health system. So community owns that program. They do the planning, usually have a steering committee. They implement it, and then they do a lot of networking. And then you have to come up with policies and procedures, for the police department, for the mental health system. I know Cleveland's on the line. They're going to be talking in a few minutes, and they've got some of the best policies and procedures I've ever run across. The operational elements of CIT, well, of course, you have to have the officer. You have to have the dispatcher, so you do some training for them. One of the main things for dispatchers is they need to know, if they ask the person over the phone, have you been taking your medications? Well, if the person says no, that's important for the CIT officer going to that scene to know. And then you have to have a coordinator. I believe each police department and even the community in mental health and in advocacy needs a coordinator that troubleshoots things and hopefully keeps records of the successes, because you need to do that. The curriculum, basic strategies, basic verbal skills, stages of this escalation, one-on-one interactions, and then sometimes in the course we do complex interventions. Before I was a policeman, I was a school teacher, and I realized through learning theories that anything you go hands-on, you never forget. It stays with you forever. And boy, that role plays that the officers go through, they attest to that they'll never forget that, and that's a very good learning process, we believe. Then you have your sustaining elements. You have to do evaluation and research because you have to prove the evidence of the effectiveness. I know at CIT International we're moving towards being an evidence-based practice. I'm not quite sure we're there yet. I know I've seen it touted as a best practice, but it's kind of hard to build up evidence. Most police departments don't have statistics on how many people they dealt with mental illness and what happened before they started CIT, so that makes it difficult. Then you have to have in-service training. An example, I started the CIT in Akron in the year 2000. Back then, autism wasn't on our radar screen. Well, now it's a big part of CIT. So you have to bring the officers back in, your CIT officers, and give them additional training, as well as all the other officers, on things that come up. And then there's the recognitions and honors. I mean, the officers that wear that CIT pin proudly, yes, they should be recognized. And usually it's someone like NAMI, sometimes the mental health system, that wants to recognize them for what they're doing, going above and beyond, and that keeps them enthused and keeps them going. And then, hopefully, developing CIT in other communities. Small law enforcement agencies need most of their patrol officers to go through the course so that they would have an officer available when that call comes in. CIT programs are the foundation for developing meaningful collaborations with community behavioral health services and not merely training for police. CIT programs serve as a catalyst to create a spectrum of interconnected community health services with a no wrong door philosophy. And that's very important because if the officers get turned away at the mental health facility they are trying to take the person to, or they get that body language that tells them that, oh, we don't really want this person, guess what? Sometimes they'll take the easiest road, which is put a small charge on the person and put them in the jail. At least they're safer there and the community is safer there than being out there on the streets. So that's very important. CIT programs create the spectrum of interconnected community health services with a no wrong door philosophy, leads to greater accessibility improved public safety, and efficient utilization of limited resources. So here's an early study. It was in 2003 that Dr. DuPont, who was a big part of starting CIT in Memphis, one of their first studies showed that after 90 days, getting the person diverted and compared to jail, there was a better connection to community treatment, of course. There was improved mental health status symptoms, and there was a lower rate of rearrest. Obviously, you know, CIT works, but following the core elements are almost crucial, especially keeping that partnership within the community. Thank you.
Mark and Sarah, you're up.
Mark and Sarah, we can't hear you. Your phones must be on mute. Mark and Sarah?
Hi, this is Mark and Sarah. We're back on the line. We apologize for that. Good.
All right, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sara Servadio. I work for the Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health, and I'm the AOT coordinator for Westchester County. We're located just north of the Bronx. So I'm going to talk about two situations in Westchester County that involved CIT intervention and AOT that have had a successful outcome. So two brief vignettes. So we're going to talk about Joe. He was traveling at a high speed down one of our county highways. He crashed his vehicle into a guardrail at approximately 110 miles per hour. When the state police officer arrived on the scene, he tried to provoke them into shooting him. A CIT trained state trooper identified that he was in a state of crisis. Despite the fact that he had just crashed his car and was asking the state trooper to shoot him, Joe had no affect. The state trooper brought him to the local 939 receiving hospital, where he was evaluated and admitted to the psychiatric unit. The inpatient unit initiated the AOT order, and our office worked with the arresting officer to have Joe brought in on the day of discharge for booking and processing so he could face the charge. Joe has successfully completed his AOT and continues to do well in the community. This was about 2 years ago. We're then going to talk about Lou. So our Westchester County Police Department had been involved with Lou on a number of different occasions. He was causing disturbances in the community and was engaging in behavior that might be considered threatening. In addition to his menacing behaviors, he was living on the streets, bathing and drinking from a stream in the middle of town. Each time police identified that he was a person in crisis, they brought him into the ED, but the hospital did not feel that he met the criteria for admission. One of the CIT officers reached out to our office, and together we attempted to locate Lou. We also gathered information from each of the police contacts, and we drew together the information to present a fuller picture to the chief of psychiatry. Lou was then admitted, placed on AOT. This was about 4 years ago, and Lou continues to do well in the community now.
This is Mark Giuliano. I'm a program director for Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health. And those are a couple of the examples of the many examples that we've had where we've brought together both elements of assisted outpatient treatment as well as the crisis intervention team. And one of the continued mantras of the CIT movement is that CIT is more than just training. Yep. It's more than just training, and we as the local mental health authority are part of that more. Not only is it the local mental health authority, but it's also got to be families and peers as well as a broader community. And our office works regularly with many of the different jurisdictions to ensure collaborations to provide the timely provision of services. I want to point out that not everyone who experiences crisis or receives a response from a CIT-trained officer or team warrants assisted outpatient treatment. We as representatives of the mental health system can still be helpful in connecting that person to services and resolving many of the issues that arise involving from the sometimes limited access to treatment and services. And in those circumstances, we do consider AOT when all of the other supports and services have been exhausted. In the immediate crisis, law enforcement really have the burden of de-escalation and the burden of decision-making that's going to impact the outcome of the crisis. And all of this is really time-sensitive. But law enforcement, for the most part, are really practical and pragmatic people. And as Lieutenant Woody pointed out a moment ago, if it turns out that they feel like there's some level of resistance from the mental health side of the fence, they're going to take the course of least resistance and will often find a charge to arrest the person on. We want to make sure that the mental health system is responsible, and that really becomes our duty, if you will, is that we have to create a mental health system that's both responsive and accessible so that we can ensure people end up coming into the mental health treatment system as opposed to having continued contacts with law enforcement. If the person person has multiple contacts with law enforcement due to their crisis situation, an officer should be able to feel confident in connecting that person to the AOT coordinator, to the local mental health authority within the community, because they should anticipate that there's going to be a timely response and that we will be responsible for following up. Which also goes back to a point on the other slide. When we take a look at that collaboration, it's important not to have a diffusion of responsibility. You want to have a point person within the local mental health department as well as backup. Somebody who's going to be able to respond on almost an immediate basis to that to the request of law enforcement, so that we can ensure the provision of services. If it turns out that we've got a person that does end up going on to a court-ordered treatment, once services are in place, not only is the person held accountable for working towards their own recovery, but the system is held accountable as well. If the person's having a difficult time adhering to their treatment plan and needs to receive support of a hospital, we also would want that CIT-trained officer to be the person to respond to take that person in to the hospital for the purpose of evaluation. We want an officer that's going to have a skill set that includes empathy and sensitivity to ensure that the person's trip to the hospital is going to be the least traumatic for them. And then finally, when we take a look at these interventions, we also know that we're going to end up coming across system issues that seem to be difficult to resolve. We want to be able to have a community forum to discuss where we're running into difficulties, if there are problems with wait times in the hospital, if there are problems accessing case management or care management services within the community, if there are issues from that the mental health community perceives on the law enforcement side of the fence. We want to be able to have an open discussion and create a safe forum to discuss these systems issues so that we can really create the best system possible. So that's really what I have. So I'm going to pass it on over to Carole.
Okay, thank you. It looks like can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. This is Carole Ballard, and I'm from the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County, and I'm the CIT Program Officer, and I'm here with
Captain James Purcell, and I'm the CIT Coordinator for Cleveland Division of Police.
We thank you for your time and attention to this discussion this afternoon. Our discussion is on lessons learned. We have an AOT program here in Cuyahoga County. It's facilitated by the Adams Board, and we thought about our role in this in terms of our crisis intervention team program. We are a very, very large community, and we have not one CIT program, but we have multiple outlets that go along with the core elements of CIT. But for our discussion this afternoon, we're going to be talking about the intercept between the AOT program here in Cuyahoga with the Cleveland Division of Police. We put together a couple of do's and don'ts, and I'll let Captain Purcell go from there.
Obviously, the first one is they do have a full understanding about each other's roles is huge. Kind of the way the program was developed here was developed outside, having law enforcement input. So when it was kind of rolled out, it was problematic right away. The first case that was done was a unique individual. There was information that we really could have used. The officers had never seen the paperwork because it looked different from anything they had ever seen. They were very used to probate warrants. This order to convey didn't look exactly like the probate warrant. So it's confusing. It wasn't really explained, and they had a new sergeant that the paperwork was dropped off to, so it was a little bit of a perfect storm of different elements that created a problem. Also, I think the individual that they had an order to pick up, I don't think he was an English speaker, and he had some other issues that were problematic. So I think the big thing here is when a program like this is developed and rolled out, you need the input from law enforcement, and we start seeing the do's and don'ts. Don't develop programs that involve actions that impact law enforcement mental health system without their input. Don't make assumptions about law enforcement's ability to hold a transport, and do communicate and collaborate with the CIT coordinator, including updates on potential warrants and AWOL clients. So I think a big thing is, and I think Mike Woody can probably attest to this, police departments develop policies on everything. And the bigger the department, the longer the policy takes to put together. So we want to have a policy in place when a program like this gets rolled out. So the input from the mental health side is huge in us being able to understand what is expected of us, so we can communicate what our abilities and our limitations are, and that we can have a policy for the officers to follow so they don't feel like they are kind of out on a limb in dealing with these situations. So that word collaboration really comes to the forefront in developing a program like this and rolling it out.
The one thing that I'll add about what made this a unique scenario for the Division of Police is that for many of you on the line, you may or may not be aware, is that Cleveland is under a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice. We newly rolled out our CIT policies, which was signed into the department January 10th, 2018. So we had already gone through a long-term process of training all division officers on some updated issues related to that policy. So we had to do some backtracking to incorporate some understanding of this. So one of the things that one of our do's is do read for departments on the line, and I'm not sure who's there, do read and understand the assisted outpatient treatment law, because that's going to be important as part of the legal update that most departments train under. Do be explicit about what you're able to do if no legal warrant and/or order is available. So many local municipalities that might be on the line might have some informal process that they could do that might be different for a division as large as Cleveland. Do include law enforcement in regular meetings regarding the status. And so we have an invite. We have, there's an updated, this program here in Cuyahoga meets on a very regular basis, very well managed, and Captain Purcell and I will be attending its upcoming discussion. Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
In responding to, in order to convey, we worked out an arrangement which we thought would work out pretty well for the division in our meeting. The agency called Frontline Services, we met as a group and we developed a client profile sheet. And the purpose of that is to give that officer some updated information about that client, because when we saw the order to convey, it didn't tell us anything. And in order for dispatch to know how to convey that call, they need some behavioral information to send out to that division. So the client profile sheet was developed. And then it will help coordinate that information. Also, we asked that the CIT coordinator be contacted either by email or by phone to provide a heads up on the client and the order that's coming. And then if the program actually indicated that they could be made available since they have a relationship with that client, or they can be available by phone. So they put that information on the form. That's important as part of that collaboration. And so that was really a good piece of it. We lost something in our discussion. Something got lost. The next part of that is the CIT officer. Once the CIT officer gets that information and it is given to the district that he's at, usually these are two-man calls, and they will go out to intervene and to transport that person. And in this case, all of those clients are to be transported to St. Vincent Charity Hospital. Following that interaction, the officer will complete a CIT stat sheet and will indicate if that was an AOT transport on the sheet. So we have a sheet that CIT officers complete for every intervention, and this will be relatively new on that sheet. They will have to write it in because at the time that the sheet was developed, it wasn't available. So this is a copy of the AOT order to convey behavioral sheet. And the purpose of the order and the communication needs and preferences are on here. The triggers, any kind of trauma-related information, high-risk behaviors, suicidal and homicidal ideation, all of that is important. And the most important part of that is access to weapons. Weapons is a very broad definition, along with recent stressors. So that's the kind of information the division is asking for on that sheet. Captain Purcell?
Yeah, I think this is really important. If anyone developing a program, or if your police department and your local area has an AOT team, and like I said, the lesson was learned from our first drop-off of an AOT order to convey at a district. There was no information with it. They had like a name and address, and that was it. They weren't really sure what was going on with the person. They didn't know exactly why they were going over there. They just knew the male needed an evaluation. So all these things are really important. It's really important to have a case manager that's available for more information if they can be on scene, someone that the person's been dealing with. Obviously, that's important. And I think we kind of stressed to them that we use our CIT officers for this. It's a little bit different kind of protocol and mindset than in the past where, okay, call the police, they'll drag them out, drag them to wherever we need. You know, they're the taxi cab, they're whatever. Well, we handle things differently now. You know, there's a lot of focus on de-escalation, and there's a lot of focus on getting people to comply verbally versus just picking someone up and taking them somewhere. So obviously all these information that's on this order to convey is huge. So we're going to know the purpose that it's an order to convey, but any communication problems with the person, if there's anything that triggers them, if they any kind of history of violence, aggression, suicide, homicidal, weapons, the recent stressors, what's going on with them. All these are obviously extremely helpful to anyone that's ever had to de-escalate someone in crisis. You can see why this sheet is really huge for officers to be able to go and communicate effectively with the person.
So one of the things that we do in our local CIT program is collect the CIT stat sheets on every encounter. The data is compiled, and we'll be looking at interventions regarding any kind of special legal order. We've always done that, where the officers will check off probate, pink slip, but now we'll have AOT identified as well. Sometimes on the sheets, the CIT stat sheet, the officer may indicate any kind of concerns, so those are the things that we would communicate in the ongoing AOT meetings. Use of force, law enforcement, and collaboration with representatives from the DOJ review and discuss AOT concerns for problem solving and recommendations. We actually, the CIT program with the City of Cleveland is actually part of the Mental Health Response Advisory Committee, and this is where we might discuss issues related to use of force. But use of force takes on a different meaning with the division as a result of the settlement agreement, so that kind of discussion may be held in other forums as well. So in terms of next steps, information regarding the AOT protocols are being introduced in 2018 with the division. The AOT protocols to be part of the annual in-service training with the Division of Police mid-2018. So what that means is the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board is responsible for coordinating the in-service training, and one of our topics is going to be legal update, and we'll incorporate the order to convey in that as well. Captain Purcell and I recently participated in the Ohio Association of Chief of Police meeting last week, and so we talked about the order to convey. There were about 45 or 50 agencies represented in that meeting. So that's a great way to disseminate that information to other chiefs throughout the county as well.
I think that's about it for us.
Yeah, this is Ashley from the Game Center. This is an opportunity if anyone has any questions that they want to ask about the webinar. You can either unmute your phones and talk to us here, or you can type a question into the chat box.
Ashley, is there a way for us to get a copy of that form?
Yeah, I'll try to get it up again. I think in the beginning there was an option to download that form. This webinar is being recorded. I'm going to be sending out the link to everyone, and I'll include the document as well to make sure everybody has access to that. Okay, if there's no questions, we can wrap up. I just wasn't sure if anyone wanted to ask anything before we move on. I want to remind everybody that we have office hours. So if you'd like to schedule any office hours with Betsy Johnson, you can contact me directly. My name's Ashley Schultz, and my email and phone number is right here on the slide. Hey, Betsy, do you have anything else to say before we conclude?
No, I just want to thank all the presenters, and if folks have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to any one of us. We're happy to help.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.